Penguin Random House Audio presents The Somebody People by Bob Proehl. Read for you by Thérèse Plummer. To those charged with fixing things we broke, and those whose broken things we tried to fix. Prologue. Staring at the Sea, 1998. And in the red clouds rose a wonder o'er the Atlantic Sea. Intense, naked, a human fire fierce glowing, as the wedge of iron heated in the furnace, his terrible limbs were fire. With myriads of cloudy terrors, banners dark, and towers surrounded. William Blake, America, a Prophecy. A million tiny things add up to a death. Take away one, and life goes on. Laid out in perfect sequence, they lead to an end. On Wednesday, 2 fifth years at the Bishop Academy for the Arts turned in the same term paper, word for word. The teacher hauled them into Headmaster Kevin Bishop's office and left them to his judgment. Elton Daly claimed Marcine Walden psychically poached the paper from him, and Marcine insisted any theft was accidental. She was a dream walker, roaming the sleeping minds of students in the dorms while she slept. It was possible she experienced the paper while wandering through Elton's dream. She had no more control over it than any dreamer has over their own path. The way she saw it, she was the victim, subject to the nightmares and wet dreams of her fellow students, unable to dream for herself. Kevin's cell phone came to life in his pocket like a lively cricket. He continued listening to the argument, tenting his fingers under his chin in a display of interest. The quickest thing would be to pry into their minds and confirm what he suspected. Marcine had easy smarts and a deep current of intellectual laziness. Elton excelled in all his academics but was failing psychic defense. God help me, I know them all so well, he thought. Rather than investigate and dole out punishment, he facilitated reconciliation. Marcine would rewrite her paper with Elton's help and would teach him to keep his mind shut. As they left his office, Kevin caught a spark pass between them. Not romantic, but an understanding of mutual interest. The seed of community. He smiled at the small joys and miseries of his job. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Laura at her house in eastern Maine. After the calls was a text from her cell. Been meaning to call you but worried I'm overreacting. Have concerns about Bobby and hoping you could come up and talk to him. The message was no different from hundreds of others he received at the academy. Mothers and fathers sure their children were a danger to themselves or others. Concerns. They all had concerns. Kevin checked his calendar, then texted back. So nice to hear from you. It's been too long. Busy with academy stuff until the end of the week, but I can take the early train up on Saturday and be there by afternoon. It will be good to see you and Tom and Bobby. Waiting for a response, Kevin went into the hive to find Bobby and do a quick assessment. He could see the boy, a shimmer among a sea of twinkling lights. Nothing remarkable, which wasn't a surprise. Bishop had watched Laura closely growing up, but her ability hadn't been that impressive. Some minor light manipulation. The man she ended up with, over Kevin's mild objections, was a low-level precognitive who made a living beating the stock market by seeing shifts a few seconds ahead. These things weren't genetic, but there were trends. When Laura called to tell Bishop she was pregnant after a long period of drifting among the communes and kibbutzes residents had built across the world, Kevin bought her a house on Oceanside Drive near his own. The enclave in Maine was a yuppie iteration of hippie ideals. A nice place to settle into if you never wanted to feel alone. Kevin rarely made it to his own house there, but Laura and Tom had been over the moon and had lived there full time since Bobby was born. The shimmer of Bobby Foster's hive body solidified, and he looked at Kevin quizzically. He was tiny, but that didn't mean anything. Kevin had students who were physically hulking but manifested in the hive as 90-pound weaklings. Charles Atlas ads in reverse. "Hello, Bobby," Kevin said. "Your mom tells me you've started to resonate. That's very exciting." Bobby's expression didn't change. He'd never been a cheerful kid, sullen even on the Christmases when Kevin went out to visit, accepting expensive toys from Grandpa Kevin with politeness but no enthusiasm. His hive body dissipated like smoke. Kevin came out of the hive and checked his phone. There was a text from Laura. "Thanks." Delays and distractions piled up. A million tiny things. He'd forgotten a dance recital on Saturday and bumped his trip back to Sunday, when the first train out wasn't until 9, with a long gap between connections in Boston. The Boston to Algonquin line juddered and start-stopped along ancient tracks, and one lurch spilled Kevin's lukewarm coffee down the front of his white shirt. By the time the train pulled into the Algonquin station, Kevin was annoyed with the whole trip. He called a cab that took forever to show up because it was the off-season and there was only one cab in town. He texted Laura that he had to stop by his house to get cleaned up and he'd be there shortly. Kevin's house was a bungalow with a sliver of beachfront. He hired people to keep the place up and tried not to think of them as staff. The yard was trimmed and the house was spotless, with not a speck of dust on the collection of maritime kitsch that had come with the house. Upstairs, the dressers and closets were stocked with clothes. Kevin often thought of retreating to the beach house on a whim. No suitcases. But it never worked out. The clothes he kept there were cast-offs from a former life. Shed skins. He picked out a chambray dress shirt that was too sharp at the shoulders to be fashionable and snug around his paunch. He walked down Oceanside Drive toward Laura and Tom's place as the daylight sputtered out behind a row of new construction, houses built tall on the hill to afford the owners views of the water. Their long shadows crept over the street, over the smaller houses bought early and cheap, and on to the beach, inching toward the incoming tide. Laura and Tom's house was bigger than Kevin's, but modest, a family home on a piece of the beach that transitioned from rough sand to sharp rock, down from the break wall that protected the nicer homes farther down the street. Their lawn was littered with Bobby's toys, sun-faded primary-colored hunks of plastic with edges rounded for safety, some of which Kevin remembered purchasing. From under a miniature picnic table near the side of the house, Kevin heard a mewling sound and went toward it. Squatting onto his haunches, he came eye to eye with Easter, the elderly and round-faced silver tabby he'd bought for Laura on her 24th birthday. The plump cat's hind legs had been replaced with the back end of a gray seagull. The thin bird legs couldn't support Easter's bulk. She dragged herself toward Kevin on her forelegs, webbed feet slapping uselessly on the wet grass. Kevin held out a hand to the cat, which bowed her head like a condemned man waiting for the mercy of the axe. He scratched under her jaw as dread stirred in his guts. Kevin heard another noise from inside the house. It was wheezing and plaintive, not unlike Easter's pained cry. He pulled his hand back and headed toward the house, Easter trying futilely to follow, calling for him to come back. Having come from his own house, Kevin was reminded by Laura and Tom's living room that there was a difference between a well-kept house and a lived-in home. Simple clutter, the echoes of use, imbued warmth to a space. Here it was augmented by the smell of Nag Champa burning and a Tori Amos album on the stereo. Laura had played it constantly in the months after her mother died, the dancing piano and lilting soprano drifting out of her dorm room whenever Kevin went to check on her. A year later, when she told him kindly but firmly that she was too old to stay at the school any longer, and that it was time for her to be out from under his care, he played the same album to fill the absence in her wake. The songs came to hold conflicting emotions that were impossible for the words and music to bear. He hadn't listened to it in years, and hearing it now brought him back to the day she left. He stood in the doorway, momentarily lost, until he heard a whine of pain and fear from the kitchen. The tile floor was scattered with sharp...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?